The lost platoon. The Americans who never broke. The world had turned white and gray and red. Staff Sergeant James Holloway pressed his face against the frozen earth, feeling the vibration before he heard the sound. A low, grinding rumble that traveled through the ground like the footsteps of something terrible and inevitable. Then came the whistle, high and climbing. Every man in the foxhole knew that sound. Holloway grabbed Private Danny Kozlowski by his frost-covered collar and yanked him down just as the shell hit 30 yards east, erupting in a fountain of dirt, snow, and splintered pine. The concussion wave rolled over them. Kozlowski's helmet rang like a bell. When the ringing stopped, there was only the wind, a howling, relentless blizzard wind that had been screaming through the Ardennes forest for 3 days straight, driving snow into their faces, into their foxholes, into their lungs. The kind of wind that made you feel like the world itself wanted you dead. Jesus Christ, Kozlowski breathed, his words turning to vapor. He was 19 years old and had been in Europe for exactly 23 days. Holloway pulled himself up to the lip of the foxhole and squinted through the swirling white. The forest around them was a graveyard of shattered trees. Black trunks snapped like toothpicks, branches hanging at wrong angles, everything covered in a layer of fresh snow that made the destruction look almost beautiful, almost peaceful. But Holloway knew better. Out there, somewhere in that white hell, German infantry were moving. Probably armor too. The word had come down yesterday, garbled and half lost through a dying radio. German counteroffensive. Multiple divisions. Breakthrough along the front. And then the radio had died completely. "Sarge, you think they forgot about us?" Kozlowski asked. His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely form the words. Holloway didn't answer because he didn't want to lie. 2nd Platoon, Baker Company, 110th Infantry Regiment. 37 men when they dug in at this nameless crossroads 4 days ago. Now 29. 8 already gone to shells, snipers, and the cold that was killing just as surely as any German bullet. They'd been told to hold this position, to keep the crossroads open for a supply column that never came, to wait for relief that hadn't arrived, to maintain radio contact that no longer existed. They'd been forgotten. Holloway knew it in his bones. Another shell screamed in, closer this time. The explosion lifted snow and frozen earth in a black geyser. Somewhere to the left, someone was screaming, high and awful, the sound of a man who'd found a piece of shrapnel with his name on it. Corporal Eddie Martinez was already moving, crawling on his belly through the snow toward the screaming, his medic bag bouncing against his hip. "Everyone stay down," Holloway shouted, though the wind nearly stole his words. "Don't give them targets." The shelling continued, methodical, searching, walking across their position like a farmer plowing a field. The Germans were ranging in, trying to find the exact coordinates of their foxholes. Holloway counted the seconds between impacts. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3. They were getting closer. His hand found the stock of his M1 Garand, ice cold even through his wool gloves. The gloves were thin now, worn through at the fingertips. Everything was wearing through. Their uniforms, their supplies, their hope. Private First Class Thomas Tommy Ricci dropped into the foxhole beside them, his face so pale it was almost blue. "Sarge, Lieutenant wants you at the command post." "Now." Holloway looked at Kozlowski. The kid's eyes were wide, terrified. "Stay here. Keep your head down. If you see movement in the trees, you don't shoot unless I give the order. We can't waste ammunition." "Ammunition," Kozlowski repeated numbly. They were down to maybe 60 rounds per man. 3 grenades left in the entire platoon. 1 bazooka with 2 rockets. That was it. That was all they had to hold back whatever was coming through that forest. Holloway climbed out of the foxhole and ran in a low crouch, moving from tree to tree, following the depressions in the snow that marked the path between positions. The command post was just a slightly larger hole in the ground, covered with branches and a piece of canvas that snapped and whipped in the wind. He slid down into it feet first, landing next to Lieutenant Robert Pritchard, who was hunched over a map that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were beginning to tear. Pritchard was 24 years old and looked 50. His eyes were bloodshot, his face unshaven, his hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the cold that had worked its way into all of them, into their muscles and bones and nerves. Holloway. Good. I need you to tell me I'm not crazy. Sir, Pritchard pointed at the map. Our position. We're here, at this crossroads. Division was supposed to be here. He tapped a spot 3 miles west, and regiment was supposed to be here. But we haven't heard from anyone in 36 hours. No radio. No news. No supply column. Nothing. I know, sir. So either everyone around us got wiped out or we're cut off. Holloway finished. He'd been thinking the same thing. The Germans broke through. We're behind their lines now. Pritchard closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked like he might cry, but when he opened them again, there was something harder there. Something that had made the decision and was ready to live with it. We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks. The Germans know where we are now. They've been ranging artillery on us all morning. Once they get our position dialed in, they'll blow us to pieces. Where do we go? West. Back toward our own lines. Or what I hope are still our own lines. Pritchard traced a route on the map with one filthy finger. There's a village here, about 6 miles. Malmedy. If we can reach it, we might find friendly forces. If not, at least it's shelter. We can fortify, wait for the situation to clarify. Holloway studied the map. 6 miles. In a blizzard. With wounded men. With Germans between them and safety. That's a long walk, sir. You got a better idea? He didn't. Staying here meant dying here. At least moving gave them a chance. When do we leave? Tonight. As soon as it's dark. The snowstorm will give us cover. Pritchard folded the map and tucked it inside his jacket. I need you to pick 5 men. Strong ones who can move fast. We'll send them ahead as scouts to make sure the route is clear. You'll lead them. Sir, that's an order, Sergeant. Pick your men. We move at 2000 hours. Holloway climbed back out into the storm. The shelling had stopped, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the wind and the occasional moan of the wounded. He made his way through the position, checking each foxhole, each man. They all had the same look now, sunken eyes, chapped lips, fingers so numb they could barely pull a trigger. The look of men who'd been pushed past their breaking point and somehow found that the breaking point just kept moving further away. He found Corporal Jack Sullivan in a hole near the eastern perimeter, sharing his last cigarette with Private Leo Kowalski. Sullivan was from Boston, built like a brick shithouse, with hands that could bend a rifle barrel and a laugh that could wake the dead. Before the war, he'd worked the docks. Now he worked at staying alive. Sully, Holloway said, dropping into the foxhole. I need you for a job. Sullivan took a long drag and passed the cigarette to Kowalski. This gonna get me killed? Probably. Good. I was getting bored. Holloway almost smiled. Sullivan had been with him since North Africa. The man had been in more firefights than Holloway could count and had never once shown fear. Or if he had, he'd hidden it behind that Boston smartass routine that drove officers crazy and kept enlisted men sane. We're moving out tonight. I need scouts. Your first pick. Who else? I'm thinking Martinez, Tommy Ricci, maybe Willis if his feet are okay, and probably Kozlowski. The kid. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. He's greener than baby shit. I know, but he's fast and he's got good eyes. And maybe this'll make a soldier out of him. Sullivan shrugged. Your funeral, Sarge. When do we leave? 2000. Full combat load, but travel light. We're going 6 miles west, back toward our lines. 6 miles. Sullivan whistled low. Through Jerry territory. In a blizzard. You sure know how to show a guy a good time. Holloway moved on, gathering his team, explaining the plan in whispered conversations that fogged the air. Eddie Martinez agreed without hesitation. The medic was from El Paso, 22 years old, with hands steady enough to tie off an artery in the middle of a firefight. Tommy Ricci was quieter, more nervous, but he nodded when Holloway asked. Private James Willis checked his feet, wrapped in strips torn from a dead German's coat, and said he could make 6 miles if he had to. And Kozlowski, when Holloway told him, just looked terrified and grateful at the same time, like he'd been chosen for something important even if it scared him to death. The afternoon crawled past. The Germans sent over a few more shells, half-hearted, probing. Holloway tried to eat, a can of hash that had frozen solid and had to be thawed against his chest, but his stomach was too tight to hold much. He checked his rifle for the 100th time. 8 rounds in the clip, 1 in the chamber. He had 2 more clips in his cartridge belt. 24 rounds total. 24 rounds between him and whatever was waiting in those woods. Darkness came early this far north, this late in December. By 1800 hours, the forest was a wall of black shapes and howling wind. Holloway gathered his scout team near the command post. They stood in a loose circle, bent against the wind, while Lieutenant Pritchard gave them their final instructions. Stay within sight of each other. No heroics. If you run into a German patrol, you avoid contact if possible. If you can't avoid it, you hit fast and get out. Your job is to scout the route, not fight a war. Understood. They nodded. Holloway, you've got the compass and the map. Get us to Malmedy. That's all I'm asking. Yes, sir. Good luck, Sergeant. They moved out single file, with Sullivan on point, then Holloway, then Martinez, Ricci, Willis, and Kozlowski bringing up the rear. They left the relative safety of the foxholes and stepped into the forest, into the storm, into enemy territory. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the wind hit them like fists. Holloway kept his eyes on Sullivan's back, watching the dark shape move between trees, around fallen logs, through drifts that grabbed at their boots. The sound of artillery faded behind them. The wind took over, constant, screaming, numbing. Holloway's face went numb first, then his hands, then his feet. He focused on moving. Left foot, right foot. One step at a time. Don't think about the cold. Don't think about the Germans. Don't think about the 23 other men waiting back at the crossroads, trusting that you'll find them a way out. They'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when Sullivan froze. He raised one fist, the signal to stop. Holloway dropped to one knee, his rifle coming up automatically. Behind him, the others did the same. For a long moment, there was only the wind. Then Holloway heard it. Voices, speaking German. Sullivan pointed to the left. Holloway crept forward until he was beside him, and together they crawled to the edge of a small clearing. Through the swirling snow, they could make out shapes. A German squad, maybe 8 men, taking shelter behind a knocked-out American half-track. They had a small fire going, and they were passing around a bottle of something, probably schnapps looted from some Belgian farmhouse. Holloway pulled Sullivan back. They retreated 20 yards, then gathered the others. Germans, Holloway whispered. 8, maybe 10, blocking our route. Can we go around? Martinez asked. Maybe, but it'll cost us an hour, and we don't know what else is out there. So we take them, Sullivan said. It wasn't a question. Holloway looked at his men. 5 soldiers, cold and tired and low on ammunition, against 8 fresh Germans with a defensive position. The smart move was to go around. The safe move. But safety was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. Every minute they spent in these woods was another chance for a German patrol to find them, for the cold to take them down, for something to go wrong. Sometimes you had to take the risk. All right, Holloway said. Here's how we do it. They spread out in a line, moving with painful slowness, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping branches or rustling the underbrush beneath the snow. Holloway's heart was hammering so hard he was sure the Germans would hear it. 50 yards. 40. 30. The Germans were laughing now, passing the bottle. They looked relaxed, confident. Why wouldn't they be? This was their territory now. They'd broken through the American lines. They'd won. 20 yards. Holloway could see their faces now, could see the steam rising from their breath, could see the rifles leaning against the half-track. He raised his M1, found the nearest German in his sights. On his left, Sullivan was doing the same. On his right, Martinez, Ricci, Willis, Kozlowski, all of them aiming, waiting. Holloway fired. The night exploded. The Germans never had a chance. Holloway's first shot took the man with the bottle in the chest, spinning him around. Sullivan's burst caught 2 more before they could move. Martinez, Ricci, and Willis opened up a heartbeat later, their rifles barking in rapid succession. The Germans were screaming, scrambling for their weapons, but it was too late. Too late. Holloway fired again and again and again. The M1's distinctive ping as the clip ejected. He was reaching for a new clip when he saw movement. A German officer, still alive, raising a Luger. Kozlowski shot him twice. The officer fell backward into the snow and didn't move. Then silence. Just the wind. Just their ragged breathing. Just the metallic smell of blood and cordite mixing with the clean smell of snow. "Everybody okay?" Holloway called. A chorus of affirmatives. They moved into the clearing, checking bodies, scavenging what they could. Ammunition, 2 boxes of rifle rounds. Food, half a loaf of black bread, hard as a rock, but food nonetheless. The bottle of schnapps, still half full. Sullivan took a long drink and passed it around. The liquor burned going down, but it was warmth, and warmth was life. "We gotta move," Holloway said. Gunfire carries. Someone might have heard. They left the clearing, left the bodies for the snow to cover, and pushed deeper into the forest. The encounter had cost them 20 minutes and about 100 rounds of ammunition, but it had also given them German supplies and a small, savage satisfaction. They'd struck back. They'd hurt the enemy. It mattered. The night wore on. They walked through a landscape that seemed designed specifically to kill them. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly by degrees. The cold worked its way through their uniforms, through their skin, into their bones. Holloway's feet had gone from painful to numb to absent. He couldn't feel them anymore. He was walking on stumps, trusting that his legs would carry him forward because he couldn't actually feel them doing it. Around midnight, they stopped to rest in a thick stand of pines that offered some shelter from the wind. They huddled together, sharing body heat, passing around the bread and schnapps. No one spoke much. They were too tired, too cold, too focused on the simple act of staying alive for one more hour. "Sarge," Kozlowski said quietly, "you think the others are okay?" Back at the crossroads, Holloway thought about Lieutenant Pritchard, about the 23 men huddled in their foxholes, waiting for a signal that it was safe to move, waiting for scouts who might never return. "They're soldiers," he said finally. "They'll hold." "But what if?" "They'll hold," Holloway repeated, harder this time. Because they had to. Because if Holloway let himself think about all the ways this could go wrong, about all the men who might die because he'd chosen the wrong route or moved too slow or missed a German patrol, he'd never be able to move again. So he didn't think about it. He just kept moving. They set out again. 2 hours later, they found the road. It was a narrow track, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles, running roughly east-west through the forest. According to Holloway's map, this road should lead them toward Malmedy, or at least toward the general area where American forces were supposed to be. Supposed to be. Nothing was certain anymore. "Road's dangerous," Sullivan muttered. "Germans will be using it. So will we," Holloway said. "At least for a while. We can move faster on the road than through the forest." They followed the road west, staying just inside the tree line, ready to dive for cover at the first sign of vehicles. The snow had let up slightly, and through breaks in the clouds, Holloway could see stars, cold and distant and indifferent. How many men had looked up at those same stars and died before morning? Hundreds? Thousands? The Ardennes was eating them all, American and German alike, grinding them up in a meat grinder made of snow and steel. Dawn was just starting to gray the eastern sky when they heard the vehicles. Heavy engines coming from the west, coming toward them. Holloway signaled everyone down, and they pressed themselves into the snow behind a fallen log, watching. 3 trucks appeared around a bend, American trucks. Deuce and a halves. Holloway's heart leaped. Friendly forces. They'd made it. Then he saw the soldiers riding in the trucks, saw the coal scuttle helmets, saw the gray-green uniforms. Germans, driving captured American vehicles. The trucks rumbled past, close enough that Holloway could smell diesel exhaust, close enough that he could see the faces of the German soldiers bundled in the truck beds, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the forest, looking for Americans to kill, looking for men like him. When the sound of engines finally faded, Holloway let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Change of plans," he whispered. "We stay off the road." They moved back into the forest, angling northwest now, using the compass to navigate. The sun came up, a pale disk behind thick clouds, offering light but no warmth. Holloway estimated they'd covered maybe 3 miles. 3 miles out of 6. Halfway. But the return trip would be harder because they'd have to go back through all the same territory, past all the same German positions, with the added burden of knowing that the enemy would be looking for them now. Around mid-morning, they found a stream, partially frozen over. They broke through the ice and filled their canteens with water so cold it hurt to drink. Martinez examined Willis's feet and shook his head. "You're getting frostbite, man. We need to get you somewhere warm or you're going to lose toes." "I'm fine," Willis said through gritted teeth. But he wasn't fine. None of them were fine. They were running on fumes and stubbornness. "Sarge, we should rest," Martinez said. "Just for an hour. Let everybody warm up a little." Holloway wanted to say no, wanted to keep moving. But Martinez was right. If they pushed too hard, someone would collapse, and then they'd all be screwed. 1 hour, he agreed. Find good cover. No fires. Sullivan, you've got first watch. They found a cluster of boulders that formed a natural shelter and squeezed into it, packing themselves together like sardines. Holloway closed his eyes, just for a moment, and fell into a gray half-sleep where he dreamed of warmth and coffee and his mother's kitchen back in Indiana, where there was always a fire in the stove and the smell of bread baking, and no one was trying to kill him. He woke to Sullivan shaking his shoulder. "Sarge, we got company." Holloway was on his feet in an instant, his rifle up. "Where?" "East. About 200 yards. German patrol. Looks like a platoon. Maybe more." Holloway swore under his breath. They couldn't fight a platoon. Not 6 against 40. They headed this way. Not directly, but they're sweeping the area. They'll find us eventually. Then we move. Now, everybody up. They left their shelter and pushed west again, moving as fast as Willis's frozen feet would allow. Behind them, Holloway could hear the Germans, distant shouts, the snap of branches. They were being hunted. The Germans knew American soldiers were in the area, and they were searching methodically, like beaters driving game toward the guns. They had to go faster. Holloway grabbed Willis and slung the man's arm over his shoulder, half carrying him. Sullivan took the other side. They moved in a shuffling run, breath coming in ragged gasps, legs burning. Kozlowski was bringing up the rear, walking backward, his rifle trained on the forest behind them. "Sarge," Kozlowski hissed. "I see them. There." The first shot cracked through the trees. Bark exploded from a pine trunk 6 inches from Holloway's head. Then all hell broke loose. The forest erupted with gunfire, the sharp crack of Mausers, the deeper bark of American M1s. Holloway dropped Willis behind a fallen log and started returning fire, working his rifle as fast as he could. Sullivan was beside him, cursing in that thick Boston accent, squeezing off shots at muzzle flashes in the trees. "Martinez, get Willis back. Ricci, Kozlowski, cover them." They were leapfrogging now, one group providing covering fire while the other moved. It was chaos, pure and simple. Holloway couldn't see the Germans clearly, just shapes moving between trees, flashes of gray uniform. He aimed at movement and fired. Aimed and fired. His clip pinged out. He slammed in a new one, chamber round, kept firing. Something hot and angry tugged at his left arm. He looked down and saw his sleeve torn, saw blood. He'd been hit. He didn't feel it yet. The adrenaline was blocking the pain, but he'd been hit. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, and kept shooting. They fought their way west, trading ground for time, leaving the Germans behind through sheer desperation and suppressive fire. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the shooting stopped. They'd broken contact. They'd escaped. Holloway counted heads. Sullivan, check. Martinez, check. Ricci, check. Willis, being carried now by Martinez and Ricci. Kozlowski. Where's Kozlowski? They all froze. Turned around. The kid wasn't there. Holloway felt his stomach drop. "Kozlowski," he called, not caring anymore if the Germans heard. "Danny." A rustle in the brush. Then Kozlowski appeared, stumbling forward, his helmet gone, his face white as the snow. He was holding his rifle in one hand, and his other hand was pressed against his side. Blood was seeping between his fingers, staining his uniform black-red. "I'm okay," Kozlowski said. "I'm okay. Just got clipped. I'm okay." He took 2 more steps and collapsed. Martinez was there instantly, ripping open Kozlowski's jacket, examining the wound. Holloway watched the medic's face, trying to read it. Martinez looked up, and his expression said everything. The wound was bad, high on the left side, just below the ribs. Entry wound. Martinez rolled Kozlowski gently and found the exit wound, bigger, messier, through and through. The bullet had punched clean through, and the kid was bleeding out. "Can you stop it?" Holloway asked. Martinez was already working, packing the wound with gauze, wrapping it tight with bandages from his medic bag. "I can slow it, but he needs a hospital, Sarge. He needs surgery. He needs—" Martinez's voice broke. "He needs more than I can give him out here." Kozlowski's eyes were open, looking up at the gray sky. "I'm cold, Sarge." "Why am I so cold?" "You're gonna be fine, kid." Holloway lied. "Martinez is patching you up. You're gonna be fine." "My mom," Kozlowski whispered. "Tell my mom I tried. Tell her I wasn't scared." "You're gonna tell her yourself. When we get home. You hear me? You're gonna tell her yourself." But Kozlowski's eyes were closing. Martinez was pressing both hands on the wound now, trying to stop the bleeding, but it kept coming, soaking through the bandages, staining the snow beneath them. Holloway held the kid's hand, held it tight, like if he just held on hard enough, he could anchor Kozlowski to life, could keep him from slipping away. "Sarge," Sullivan said quietly, "we gotta move. The Krauts are gonna be on us any minute." "I know. We can't carry 2 wounded." "I know." Holloway looked down at Kozlowski. The kid's breathing was shallow now, irregular. His lips were turning blue. Martinez met Holloway's eyes and shook his head. There was nothing more to do. Nothing anyone could do. The kid was 19 years old, and he was dying in a forest in Belgium. And there was no stopping it. "Danny," Holloway said. "Hey, Danny, look at me." Kozlowski's eyes fluttered open. Barely focused. Barely there. "You did good, soldier. You understand me? You did real good. You're a credit to the platoon. Your mom's gonna be proud." Kozlowski smiled, just a little, just a ghost of a smile. Then his eyes closed, and his breathing stopped, and he was gone. They stayed there for a moment, in the snow, in the silence. Then Holloway closed the kid's eyes, took his dog tags, and stood up. His arm was burning now, the adrenaline wearing off, the pain coming through. But the pain was good. The pain meant he was still alive. Kozlowski wasn't alive. Kozlowski was lying in the snow, another casualty in a war that was grinding up a whole generation. "We move," Holloway said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Flat. Empty. Now. They left Kozlowski there. They had to. There was no time for a burial, no time for anything. They left him for the snow to cover, for the forest to claim. Another lost soldier in the Ardennes. Another name that would never make it into the history books. The rest of the day was a blur. They pushed west, moving on pure willpower now. Willis was barely conscious. Martinez was exhausted from carrying him. Ricci looked like he might collapse at any moment. Sullivan kept them moving through sheer Boston stubbornness, cursing and cajoling and threatening. And Holloway just walked one foot in front of the other, his wounded arm throbbing in time with his heartbeat. As afternoon faded into evening, they finally saw it, Malmedy, or what was left of it. The village was a ruin, half the buildings reduced to rubble by artillery. But there were American flags flying, American sentries, American voices. They'd made it. By God, they'd actually made it. The sentries nearly shot them before recognizing American uniforms. They were brought to a command post in a half-collapsed church, where a harried captain listened to their report. Holloway tried to explain about the platoon at the crossroads, about the German breakthrough, about the route they'd scouted. The captain kept interrupting with questions, and Holloway kept trying to answer, but his mind was foggy now, exhausted. He just wanted to sleep, just wanted to close his eyes and not wake up for a week. "You say you've got 23 men at this crossroads?" the captain asked. "Yes, sir." Under Lieutenant Pritchard. "They're cut off, running low on supplies. They need relief." The captain exchanged glances with his lieutenants. "Sergeant, we're barely holding this village. The Germans are throwing everything they've got at us. I don't have men to spare for a relief column." "Sir, they're counting on us. We told them we'd find a way." "I understand that, Sergeant, but I've got orders to hold Malmedy. I can't authorize a relief operation right now. Holloway stared at him. Then what was the point? What was the point of us coming here if you're not going to help them? The point, the captain said, his voice hardening, is that you brought us intelligence. You've confirmed German positions along that route. That information is valuable. Your mission was successful. Our mission, Holloway said slowly, was to find help for our platoon. And you did. You found us. Now we'll do what we can when we can. When you can, Holloway repeated. He felt something crack inside him, something that had been holding him together since North Africa, since Sicily, since Normandy. All the fear he'd swallowed, all the death he'd witnessed, all the friends he'd lost, it all came pouring out in a wave of rage. Those men are dying. Right now, they're freezing and starving and dying. And you're telling me you'll help them when you can? That's enough, Sergeant. Like hell it's enough. I lost a man getting here. A good kid, 19 years old. And you're telling me it was for nothing. I said that's enough. The captain stood up. You're exhausted, Sergeant. You're wounded. You're not thinking straight. Get to the aid station. Get patched up. We'll discuss this when you've had some rest. Sullivan grabbed Holloway's good arm before he could say something that would get him court-martialed. Come on, Sarge. Let's go. They left the command post. Martinez got Willis to the aid station, where medics started working on his feet. Sullivan found them space in a cellar where other soldiers were sheltering from the shelling that started up every few hours. Holloway sat against a wall, holding his wounded arm, staring at nothing. We going back for them? Sullivan asked quietly. Yeah, Holloway said. We're going back. Just us. Just us. Sullivan nodded. Figured you'd say that. When? Tonight. Soon as it's dark. You're a stubborn bastard. You know that? Takes one to know one. They rested for a few hours, forcing down some hot food. The first hot food they'd had in days. The warmth of it almost hurt going down. A medic bandaged Holloway's arm. The bullet had torn through muscle but missed the bone. He'd be okay. He'd hurt like hell, but he'd be okay. At 2000 hours, they slipped out of Malmedy. Martinez volunteered to come with them, but Holloway ordered him to stay with Willis. Someone had to make sure the kid didn't lose his feet. Ricci wanted to come too, but he was in no shape for the trek. So it was just Holloway and Sullivan, two soldiers heading back into enemy territory to find a platoon that High Command had written off. The journey back was harder than the journey out. They were tired, wounded, running on empty. But they knew the route now, knew where the German positions were, knew how to avoid them. They moved like ghosts through the forest, two shadows in the darkness. When they heard vehicles, they hid. When they heard voices, they detoured. When they heard nothing, they ran. They reached the crossroads just before dawn. Holloway gave the password, thunder, and waited for the countersign. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, from a foxhole 30 feet away, flash. Pritchard climbed out to meet them, and Holloway had never been happier to see anyone in his life. The lieutenant looked worse than when they'd left, more exhausted, more haggard, but he was alive. They were all alive. Did you find a way out? Pritchard asked. Holloway thought about the captain in Malmedy, about his refusal to send help. Thought about Kozlowski bleeding out in the snow. Thought about the long miles through enemy territory with no support and no backup. Yeah, he said finally. We found a way. He explained the route, showed Pritchard on the map, warned him about the German positions. Pritchard listened carefully, asking questions, making notes. When Holloway was finished, the lieutenant nodded. We'll move out tonight. Same plan as before. Scout team first, then the main body. Can you lead them again? Every part of Holloway wanted to say no. Wanted to curl up in a foxhole and sleep for 1,000 years. But he looked at the men around him, at the faces peering out of foxholes, at the soldiers who'd been holding this godforsaken crossroads for days with no support, and he knew he couldn't say no. These were his men, his responsibility, his brothers. Yeah, Holloway said, I can lead them. They spent the day preparing, redistributing ammunition so that every man had at least 40 rounds, checking weapons, eating what little food remained, mostly K-rations so old they'd lost whatever flavor they'd started with. The men knew something was happening. You could see it in their faces, in the way they moved with a little more purpose, a little more hope. They were getting out. Finally, They were getting out. Holloway moved among them, checking their condition, offering what encouragement he could. He found Private Angelo Rossi in a foxhole on the southern perimeter, cleaning his bar, Browning automatic rifle, with methodical care. Rossi was from Brooklyn, 23 years old, with a face like a prize fighter and hands gentle enough to field strip a weapon blindfolded. He'd been carrying that bar since Normandy, and he loved it like some men loved women. "How's she running?" Holloway asked. "Like a dream, Sarge. Gonna need more ammo, though. I'm down to maybe 200 rounds. We'll find more. You ready to move tonight?" Rossi looked up, his dark eyes serious. "Sarge, I heard what happened to Kozlowski. I heard you went all the way to Malmedy and back. That's some crazy shit. It's what needed doing." "Yeah, but..." Rossi hesitated. "The guys are wondering, when we get to Malmedy, are we going to be okay? Are they going to take care of us?" Holloway thought about lying, thought about telling Rossi that everything would be fine, that hot food and warm bunks and relief from this frozen hell were waiting for them. But these men deserve the truth. "I don't know," he said finally. "Command's got their own problems. We might have to fend for ourselves for a while longer, but we'll be off this crossroads. We'll have options. That's better than waiting here to die." Rossi nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Long as we're doing something, you know? Long as we're fighting back. That's all I need." That was the thing about these men, Holloway thought. They didn't need much. Just a purpose. Just a reason to keep going. Tell them to hold a crossroads, they'd hold it until they died. Tell them to march through enemy territory, they'd march. They were ordinary men doing extraordinary things, and most of them would never get medals, never get recognized, never even make it into the history books. They'd just be names on casualty lists if anyone bothered to keep track. At 1500 hours, Lieutenant Pritchard called a meeting of the squad leaders, what was left of them. Holloway, Sullivan, and Sergeant First Class Raymond Hayes, who'd taken over 3rd Squad after Sergeant Morrison caught shrapnel in the throat 2 days ago. They huddled in the command post while Pritchard outlined the plan. "We move out at 1900 hours. Full darkness. Holloway and Sullivan will lead as scouts, followed by 1st Squad. 2nd and 3rd Squad will follow at 50-yard intervals. I'll be with 2nd Squad. We move silent. We move careful. And if we run into Germans, we try to avoid contact. But if we can't avoid it," Pritchard looked at each of them. "If we can't avoid it, we hit them hard and keep moving. No prisoners. No dilas. We get to Malmedy by dawn, or we die trying." "Questions?" Hayes cleared his throat. "Sir, what about the wounded? We got 6 men who can barely walk. They walk anyway. We carry them if we have to. We don't leave anyone behind. Even the dead." Pritchard's jaw tightened. "We take their dog tags, their weapons, anything useful. But we can't carry bodies, Ray. You know that." Hayes nodded, but his face showed what they were all thinking. Leaving the dead behind felt wrong. Felt like betrayal. But there was no choice. The living had to keep living. "One more thing," Pritchard said. "When we get to Malmedy, Command might not be happy to see us. They might want us to turn around and come back here, or go somewhere else, or do something else stupid. I'm telling you now, I don't care. We've held this crossroads for 5 days with no support, no supplies, and no hope. We've done our duty. When we get to Malmedy, we're done. Anyone who doesn't like it can court-martial me." It was the most honest thing Holloway had ever heard an officer say. And looking at Pritchard's face, the exhaustion, the anger, the bone-deep determination, he realized the lieutenant wasn't just keeping them alive. He was keeping himself alive, too. They were all just trying to survive one more day. The hours crawled past. The Germans sent over a few more shells, but they were firing blind now, wasting ammunition. Holloway tried to sleep, but couldn't. His arm ached. His head ached. Everything ached. He lay in his foxhole and watched the sky turn from gray to black. Watched the stars come out, cold and distant. At 1830 hours, they began forming up, moving quietly, efficiently, each man knowing his place in the column. The wounded were helped to their feet. Private Michael O'Brien with his left arm in a sling, Corporal James Duncan with his head wrapped in bloody bandages, for others with various wounds that should have gotten them evacuated days ago. They stood on shaky legs, clutching their rifles, ready to march. Because that's what soldiers did. They marched. Holloway checked his gear one last time. rifle, ammunition, grenades. They'd found 2 more in a supply dump, giving them 5 total. Compass, map, knife, canteen. That was it. That was all he owned in the world. Everything he needed to stay alive. Sullivan appeared beside him. Ready for another walk in the woods, Sarge? Can't wait. You know, after the war, I'm never going camping. Never. If someone asks me to go to the woods, I'm going to punch them in the face. Holloway almost smiled. After the war, Sully, you're going to be back in Boston, working the docks, chasing girls, drinking too much, and telling war stories that nobody believes. Damn right. And you, Indiana, my dad's farm. I'm going to sleep in a real bed, eat my mother's cooking, and never wear a uniform again. Sounds like heaven. Sounds impossible, Holloway said. But for a moment, just a moment, he let himself imagine it. Home, peace, a life where nobody was trying to kill him. It seemed like a fantasy from another world. At 1900 hours exactly, they moved out. Holloway and Sullivan took point, with the rest of the platoon strung out behind them in a ragged column. 29 men when they'd started this morning. They'd lost 8 over 5 days. Now they were taking the remaining 29 through 6 miles of German-occupied forest, in the dark, in the cold, with wounded men who could barely walk. It was suicide. It was insanity. It was their only chance. The forest closed around them like a fist. Holloway led them along the route he'd memorized, avoiding the road, avoiding the clearings, sticking to the densest parts of the woods where the trees would give them cover. The snow had stopped, which was good for visibility, but bad for everything else. Now, their footprints would be clear and obvious, a trail leading straight to them. They'd been walking for maybe an hour when they passed the spot where Kozlowski had died. Holloway could see the disturbed snow, the dark stains that hadn't quite frozen over. He kept walking, didn't look back. Behind him, he heard someone whisper a prayer, probably Martinez, who was Catholic and prayed before every mission. Holloway wasn't much for praying. If God was watching this war, he wasn't doing much to stop it. 2 hours in, they had their first crisis. One of the wounded, Private Duncan, collapsed, just dropped in the snow and didn't get up. Hayes and 2 others tried to lift him, but Duncan was dead weight, unconscious. They couldn't carry him like this. Not for 4 more miles. Pritchard made the call. Put him on a litter. Rossi, Williams, you've got first shift carrying him. We rotate every 15 minutes. It slowed them down, slowed them way down, and it made noise, the crunch of boots, the rasp of breathing, the occasional grunt as the litter bearers stumbled over roots and rocks. Holloway kept checking his watch. They needed to make at least a mile an hour to reach Malmedy by dawn. At this pace, they'd be lucky to make half that. At midnight, they heard vehicles again. German trucks, engines growling somewhere to the south. The column froze, everyone dropping flat in the snow. Holloway held his breath, listening. The sounds grew louder, then faded. Passed them by. They waited 5 more minutes, then got up and kept moving. The cold was a living thing now, a presence that wrapped around them and squeezed. Holloway's wounded arm had gone numb, which was probably a blessing. His feet were blocks of ice. He couldn't feel his nose or his ears. He kept moving because stopping meant dying. Simple as that. Around 0200 hours, Sullivan held up a fist. Holloway crept forward. Sullivan pointed ahead to a faint glow through the trees. Firelight. Someone had a fire going. Germans, probably. Had to be. No American would be stupid enough to light a fire this close to enemy lines. Holloway signaled back to Pritchard. Enemy ahead. Pritchard came forward, low and careful. Together they crawled to within 50 yards of the fire. It was a German camp, maybe a squad, maybe more. They'd set up in a small clearing with tents and a proper fire and what looked like a radio antenna. A communication post, maybe, or just a rest area for troops moving up to the front. Can we go around? Pritchard whispered. Holloway studied the terrain. The clearing was in a natural bottleneck, steep ridges on either side, thick underbrush. Going around would mean climbing the ridge or pushing through brambles that would sound like a brass band in the quiet night. Not easily. Then we go through, fast and quiet. Maybe they won't notice. Sir, we don't have time to detour. Duncan's getting worse. We've got maybe 4 hours until dawn. We go through. It was a bad idea. But all their ideas were bad ideas now. They were just trying to pick the least bad one. Holloway nodded and passed the word back. Stealth approach. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. They moved like ghosts, spreading out into a wide line, using every bit of cover. Holloway could see the Germans now, 6 of them sitting around the fire, drinking coffee or soup or whatever Germans drank. They looked relaxed, bored even. One was reading a letter by firelight. Another was smoking. None of them were watching the woods. The American column crept past, 50 yards away, barely breathing. Holloway counted steps. 20, 30, 40. They were almost clear, almost past, almost safe. Then Duncan moaned. It wasn't loud, just a low sound of pain, of delirium. But in the quiet forest, it might as well have been a scream. The Germans' heads snapped up. Someone shouted in German. Flashlights clicked on, sweeping the woods. Run! Pritchard yelled. They ran, all pretense of stealth abandoned. The forest exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Bullets snapping through branches. Men screaming orders, screaming in pain, just screaming. Holloway fired his M1 from the hip as he ran, not aiming, just trying to keep the Germans' heads down. Sullivan was beside him, doing the same. Behind them, the platoon was scattering, running, fighting. A German came out of nowhere, rising from behind a log. Holloway shot him. Another one. Sullivan shot him. They were in the camp now, right in the middle of it. The fire showed everything in stark relief, tense equipment, Germans scrambling for weapons. Holloway pulled a grenade, yanked the pin, threw it. The explosion lit up the night. He didn't wait to see the results. Just kept running. They burst out the other side of the camp and kept going, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over fallen logs. Behind them, the Germans were shouting, organizing, probably calling for reinforcements. They'd blown their cover. The whole German army would know Americans were in the area now. Pritchard was screaming orders. First squad, suppress fire. Second squad, move. Third squad, covering positions. They fought a running battle through the forest, trading shots with Germans they could barely see. Holloway lost track of everything except the basics. Shoot, move, shoot again. His rifle barrel was getting hot despite the cold. He went through another clip, then another. His ammunition was running low. Everyone's ammunition was running low. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they broke contact. The shooting stopped. They'd outdistanced the Germans, or the Germans had decided not to pursue, or something. Holloway didn't care. They were alive. Most of them were alive. Pritchard called a halt in a thick stand of pines. Count off. I need a head count. They counted. Started at 29. Ended at 26. 3 men gone. Holloway felt his stomach clench. Ooh, Duncan, Hayes reported. Dropped the litter when the shooting started. Don't know what happened to him. Williams took a round in the back running out of the camp. And Rossi. This from Sullivan, his voice flat. Rossi's gone, Sarge. Holloway closed his eyes. Angelo Rossi from Brooklyn. 23 years old. Carried a bar like it was part of his body. Wanted to open a restaurant after the war, serve real Italian food, the kind his grandmother used to make. Gone. Just gone. We can't stay here, Pritchard said. His voice was shaking now, exhaustion and emotion breaking through. They'll be looking for us. We have to keep moving. Sir, the men are exhausted. I know, but we don't have a choice. So they kept moving. 26 soldiers stumbling through the Ardennes, leaving a trail of blood and dead friends behind them. The forest seemed endless now, a maze of trees and shadows that all looked the same. Holloway's sense of direction was starting to fail. Everything hurt. Everything was cold. He wanted to lie down in the snow and sleep and never wake up. But he didn't. He kept going. Because Kozlowski had kept going. Because Rossi had kept going. Because all the men who died over the past 5 days had kept going until they couldn't go anymore. And Holloway owed it to them to make their deaths mean something. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through bare branches. They could see each other's faces now, hollow-eyed, frost-covered, beyond exhausted. They looked like refugees, like ghosts, like men who'd already died but didn't know it yet. How much further? Sullivan asked. Holloway checked his compass, checked his map. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely read it. Maybe 2 miles. Maybe less. Hard to say. Can we make 2 miles? Holloway looked back at the column, at men swaying on their feet, at O'Brien, still clutching his wounded arm, blood seeping through the bandages, at Private Marcus Webb, who'd taken shrapnel in the leg and was hobbling along on a makeshift crutch. At all of them, these soldiers who'd given everything they had and were somehow still giving more. Yeah, Holloway said, we can make 2 miles. They walked through the morning, through a forest that was waking up around them. Birds singing, snow melting off branches in the strengthening sunlight. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't a killing ground. If every shadow didn't hide a potential enemy. If every sound wasn't a possible threat. Around 0900 hours, they heard it. Artillery. American artillery, firing from the west. The sound of it made Holloway want to cry. It meant they were close. Close to friendly lines. Close to safety. They crested a small ridge and saw Malmedy spread out below them. The village looked different in daylight. More damage than Holloway remembered, with smoke rising from several buildings, craters in the streets. But American flags were still flying. American soldiers were still manning the perimeter. They'd made it. The sentries saw them coming, a ragged column of soldiers emerging from the forest. And for a moment Holloway was afraid they'd shoot. But then someone recognized American uniforms, and the word went down the line. Hold fire. Friendlies. They stumbled into the village like survivors from a shipwreck washing up on shore. Soldiers came running to help them, taking weapons, guiding the wounded toward the aid station. Someone offered Holloway coffee, real coffee, hot and bitter, and the best thing he'd ever tasted. He drank it too fast and burned his mouth and didn't care. Lieutenant Pritchard was talking to the same captain from before, explaining what had happened, why they'd come. The captain was shaking his head, saying something about orders, about positions, about how they couldn't just abandon their post. Pritchard's voice rose. We held that crossroads for 5 days. 5 days with no support. We've done our duty. Your duty is what I tell you it is, Lieutenant. Then court-martial me. But these men aren't going back. The captain looked at the platoon, at the wounded, the exhausted, the hollow-eyed survivors. His expression softened slightly. Get them fed. Get them warm. We'll sort out the rest later. They were led to a cellar in what had been a brewery. It was crowded with other soldiers, but there was space on the floor, and someone had rigged up a heating stove. Holloway found a corner and sat down. Just sat. His legs wouldn't work anymore. He'd walked them until they'd given out, and now they were done. Sullivan dropped down beside him. We made it. Yeah. Lost 11 men doing it. Yeah. Was it worth it? Holloway thought about the question. Thought about Kozlowski and Rossi and all the others. Thought about the crossroads they'd held for 5 days, preventing German forces from using that route, buying time for the wider defense, even though nobody had asked them to. Thought about 26 survivors who would live to fight another day, who would go home eventually, who would grow old and have families and lives. I don't know, he said finally. Ask me after the war. They stayed in Malmedy for 3 days. The wounded were evacuated to field hospitals. The able-bodied were assigned to defensive positions around the village. The German offensive was losing steam. That's what the officers said, but there was still heavy fighting all along the line. The Battle of the Bulge, they were calling it. The biggest battle the American Army had ever fought. And 2nd Platoon, Baker Company, 110th Infantry Regiment had been right in the middle of it. Had held a crossroads that wasn't even on most maps. Had delayed German forces for 5 days without knowing it. Had done their job and more. On the 3rd day, Holloway was summoned to see a colonel from division. The man sat behind a desk in what had been the village's schoolhouse, surrounded by maps and papers and the organized chaos of a headquarters operation. Staff Sergeant Holloway. Sit down. Holloway sat. The colonel studied him for a long moment. I've been reading Lieutenant Pritchard's report. Hell of a story. You men held that position against considerable odds. Yes, sir. And when relief didn't come, you took it upon yourself to scout a route through enemy territory. Twice. Yes, sir. Lost 11 men doing it. Yes, sir. Holloway's voice hardened. Because we couldn't get support. Because everyone forgot about us. The colonel nodded slowly. You're not wrong, Sergeant. This offensive caught us with our pants down. We got units scattered all over this sector, cut off, surrounded, fighting their own battles. We're trying to coordinate, trying to maintain a line, but it's chaos. Your platoon was one of dozens in similar situations. That's supposed to make me feel better, sir? No, it's supposed to help you understand. This is the biggest battle we've ever fought. Mistakes were made. Communications broke down. Units got lost. People died who shouldn't have died. But your platoon held. Against everything the Germans threw at you, you held. That matters. Holloway said nothing. I'm putting you in for a Silver Star. And I'm recommending Lieutenant Pritchard for a Distinguished Service Cross. You men earned it. What about the others? What about the men who died? They'll receive Bronze Stars. Posthumously, Bronze Stars. Holloway laughed. A bitter sound. Kozlowski was 19 years old. Rossi wanted to open a restaurant. All of them had lives, had families, had futures. And now they've got Bronze Stars. The colonel's face hardened. What do you want me to say, Sergeant? That war is fair? That good men don't die for stupid reasons? You know better than that. The best I can do is make sure their sacrifice is recognized. Make sure it meant something. Did it? Did it mean something? The colonel pulled out a map and pointed to the crossroads where they'd made their stand. This position, you held it for 5 days. During that time, German forces were trying to push through this sector to reach a fuel depot here. If they'd gotten through, if they captured that fuel, they could have kept their offensive going for another week. Maybe longer. But they couldn't get through. Because you were in the way. Because you held. He traced a line on the map. The German advance stalled. Their armor ran out of fuel. Their infantry got bogged down. And by the time they regrouped, we'd brought up reinforcements. The offensive failed. We stopped them. And part of the reason we stopped them is because of what you and your platoon did at that crossroads. Holloway stared at the map. At the crossroads that had been their prison for 5 days. At the small notation someone had added, enemy advance delayed here. Nobody's going to write about it in the newspapers, the colonel continued. Nobody's going to make a movie about the lost platoon. But the men in this division know what you did. The men who are alive because German armor couldn't push through your sector, they know. And that has to be enough. Holloway stood up. His legs were steadier now. The rest had helped. The food had helped. But the weight he was carrying, the weight of Kozlowski and Rossi and all the others, that would never go away. Is that all, sir? That's all, Sergeant. You're being reassigned to a replacement depot for now. Get some real rest. When you're ready, we'll find you another unit. Yes, sir. Holloway walked out of the schoolhouse into weak winter sunlight. The village was busy around him. Trucks moving supplies, soldiers digging positions, officers shouting orders. The war went on. It always went on. Men died and were replaced. Units were destroyed and reformed. The great machine kept grinding forward, consuming everything in its path. He found Sullivan in the brewery cellar, cleaning his rifle. The same one he'd carried from North Africa to Sicily to Normandy to here. The stock was scratched and battered, the metal worn smooth in places. But still worked. It kept him alive. How'd it go with the colonel? Sullivan asked. He's giving us medals. Well, ain't that something? What kind? Silver Star for me. DSC for Pritchard. Bronze Stars for the dead guys. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. Then, Kozlowski would have liked that. Getting a medal. He was always trying to prove himself, you know? Always trying to show he belonged. He proved it, Holloway said. He proved it when he took that bullet and kept going. He proved it when he smiled at the end, even though he was dying. He proved it. Yeah, he did. They sat in silence, 2 soldiers among many, survivors of a battle that most people would never hear about. Outside, the war continued. Inside, in the quiet darkness of the cellar, they allowed themselves a moment of stillness, a moment to remember, a moment to mourn. The next morning, Holloway and Sullivan and what remained of 2nd Platoon were loaded onto trucks and driven west, away from the front, toward the replacement depot. As they rode through the Ardennes, Holloway looked out at the forest, at the trees he'd come to hate, at the snow-covered ground that had tried so hard to kill him. He thought about the crossroads they'd held, thought about whether anyone would remember it, thought about whether it mattered, if anyone remembered, and he decided it didn't matter. The men who'd been there, they would remember. They would carry those 5 days with them for the rest of their lives. Would wake up in the middle of the night hearing artillery. Would flinch at sudden noises. Would feel the cold in their bones, even on hot summer days. The crossroads would be with them always. A piece of frozen Belgian forest lodged in their souls, a reminder of what they'd endured, what they'd lost, what they'd somehow survived. That was enough. That had to be enough. Epilogue. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945. The German offensive failed. American and Allied forces held the line, then pushed back, retaking lost ground. The Wehrmacht had gambled everything on one last throw of the dice and lost. After the Bulge, the war in Europe had only one direction left to go, toward Berlin. Staff Sergeant James Holloway survived the war. He fought through the Rhineland, crossed into Germany, was there when the camps were liberated and saw things that made the Ardennes look like a picnic. He received his Silver Star in a ceremony he barely remembered, surrounded by generals and reporters who wanted to hear about heroism and courage. He told them what they wanted to hear. He didn't tell them about Kozlowski dying in the snow. He didn't tell them about leaving Rossi's body behind. Some things weren't for strangers. He went home in the fall of 1945, back to Indiana, back to his father's farm. Tried to pick up his old life like he'd just been on a long trip. But he'd changed. The farm was the same, his parents were the same, but he was different. He'd seen too much, done too much, lost too much. He had nightmares. Still woke up in the middle of the night, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Still heard artillery in thunderstorms. Still felt the cold. But he lived. He married, had children, worked the farm until his father died, then sold it and moved to town, got a job at the hardware store. Built a normal life, or something close to it. Went to American Legion meetings and saw other veterans, other men with that same look in their eyes, that same weight on their shoulders. They didn't talk much about the war. What was there to say? Corporal Jack Sullivan went back to Boston, worked the docks like he'd always planned, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 kids, drank too much sometimes, but not so much that it ruined his life. Told war stories at bars, the funny ones, the ones with good endings. Never told the real stories, those he saved for Holloway, in the letters they exchanged every Christmas. Short letters, just checking in, making sure the other was still alive, still hanging on. Lieutenant Robert Pritchard stayed in the Army. Made captain, then major. Served in Korea. Retired as a colonel. Wrote a memoir that almost nobody read, where he tried to explain what it had been like in the Ardennes, what his platoon had done. A few historians cited it. Most people ignored it. The Battle of the Bulge had bigger stories, more dramatic moments, more famous heroes. A platoon holding a crossroads didn't make the cut. But Pritchard kept the names. All 37 of them. Every man who'd been there at the beginning. He wrote them down in the front of his memoir. Wrote down where they were from, how old they were, what happened to them. Made sure someone remembered. Private First Class Danny Kozlowski's body was recovered in the spring of 1945 when the snow finally melted. He was identified by his dog tags and sent home to Cleveland, where his mother had a funeral with full military honors. His Bronze Star was presented to her by a young lieutenant who'd never met her son, who read a citation written by someone else who said all the right words about heroism and sacrifice. She kept the medal in a box and never looked at it. What she wanted was her son back. A medal was a poor substitute. Private First Class Angelo Rossi was never found. His name is inscribed on the wall of the missing at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, one of 371 names of men who died in the Battle of the Bulge, but whose bodies were never recovered. His mother lit a candle for him every Sunday for the rest of her life. The crossroads where 2nd Platoon made their stand is still there. You can visit it if you know where to look. A minor intersection in the Belgian Ardennes, marked now by a small road sign and nothing else. The forest has grown back. The foxholes have eroded away. There's no monument, no plaque, no indication that anything important happened there. But it did happen. 37 men held that position against considerable odds. 11 of them died doing it. The survivors carried the memory for the rest of their lives. And because they held, because they didn't break, because they did their duty even when everyone forgot about them, the German offensive stalled. Fuel depots remained in American hands. Reinforcements had time to arrive. The line held. History is built on moments like these. Small, forgotten stands by ordinary men doing their jobs. No cameras, no reporters, no glory. Just soldiers in foxholes, cold and scared and far from home, holding the line because that's what soldiers do. The lost platoon. The Americans who never broke. They deserve to be remembered.